Tomorrow marks 1 year since the Biden administration's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. We remember these images you're looking at here just outside the Kabul International Airport. Hundreds of thousands of Afghans desperate to flee the country in order to escape the Taliban's grip, scrambling to reach the last departing flights out of the country as they left. American forces were ultimately able to evacuate over 100,000 of those people, but countless others, including American citizens, were left behind to face an uncertain fate. In a moment, we'll talk to retired four-star General Jack Keane. First, we go to Trey Yingst in Kabul. He offers us a first-hand look from the ground at Afghanistan a year later. Hi, Trey.
Jillian, tomorrow marks 1 year since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan. Since then, the country's economy has collapsed, plunging millions of people below the poverty line. Women's rights have decreased, and the security situation here remains tense. Though when you are walking through the streets of Kabul behind me, there's a sense of normalcy. There are street vendors out selling food. You can hear those horns honking behind me. There is traffic, and the Taliban patrols like a police force. Though beyond that veneer sits fear and uncertainty for the Afghan people. Remember, when U.S. forces left this country, they left behind thousands of American allies, translators, and people who worked at the U.S. Embassy. And those people are terrified. We spoke with one today who spent months in a safe house. He's worried about the lives of his family, and he's stuck here in Afghanistan. And while the Taliban puts on a good face for the international community and they release statements, their words often do not match their actions. One example, they released a decree saying that women here are free. Though women are not allowed out at night without a male escort, young women, particularly teenagers, aren't able to go to secondary school in most of the country, and any woman leaving their house has to be completely covered. That's the situation right now on the ground in Afghanistan. Jillian?
Trey, I understand that you spoke today with a Taliban official about the situation, the security environment in particular on the ground. What did they tell you?
That's right. Today
last month, the leader of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, was killed in a U.S. drone strike in Kabul. Did the Taliban know he was here?
The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan made it very clear that the leadership was not aware of either his arrival nor his presence in Kabul, and they will continue to conduct the investigation to verify facts. But the fact of the matter remains that this was a grave violation of international law by the United States of America, conducting unilateral actions inside a sovereign state.
We discussed a variety of topics with this Taliban official, but what I found interesting regarding his remarks about Ayman al-Zawahiri, the al-Qaeda leader who was killed last month in a U.S. drone strike here in Kabul, this official refused to even confirm that Zawahiri was dead. And that is the position of the Taliban. They say the United States acted illegally by launching this drone strike in Afghanistan, and they are not confirming that Zawahiri was killed in the strike. Jillian.
Trey Yingst reporting from Kabul for us today. Thank you. Joining us here in Washington is Fox News strategic analyst General Jack Keane. General, thanks for being with me today.
Yeah.
Last August, you said that this withdrawal is one of the most significant foreign policy and national security blunders in American history. So as we sit here today, has anything changed?
Yeah, it's such a tragic situation and is so preventable. Obviously, the economic destitution of the country itself, a failed state in the sense, people suffering. Taliban have returned to their draconian rule of the 1990s, denying people individual rights. Women cannot work, they can't go to school. They're controlling all of the culture, dress, no music in the country. They're just shutting down all the normal cultural aspirations that a nation or a people would have. And what makes it, compounds that, is the fact that, look, we went to Afghanistan to stop the Taliban from providing sanctuary to the al-Qaeda from which the attack on the United States took place. We all know that. And what did this decision get us? It got us the Taliban in charge again, providing sanctuary to the Taliban. I mean, providing sanctuary to the al-Qaeda. And Zawahiri's killing resurrected the fact that he's living in a Taliban house in a neighborhood that I've been to many times where senior Taliban leaders are in residence, and obviously they are protecting the al-Qaeda leader as well as his organization. And to date, we've done nothing against that organization or done nothing against ISIS. So the fact is, Afghanistan is a sanctuary for terrorism. The very reason we went there, the very reason we stayed there for 20 years, to ensure that terrorists did not rise again to attack the American people, and we're right back where we started.
So, General, that tremendous counterterrorism success last week, the killing of al-Qaeda's leader, also, as you mentioned, had the effect of laying bare this stark reality, which is that the Taliban is up to the same old tricks they've always been. They're harboring terrorists once again. Did anybody in the U.S. government, in the Biden administration, have reason to believe that had changed before they executed the final phases of this withdrawal?
Well, what's indisputable is the fact that people who were close to the decision when the president made that decision in April of 21 is that he was somewhat defiant. He was advised by the military, by his intelligence services, and by many of his foreign policy advisors and all of the NATO nations to maintain the stalemate that we had, the status quo. It wasn't a perfect situation, far from it, but it was a stalemate where the Taliban could not take over from the government could not defeat the Taliban, but because of our presence, NATO and the United States and our intelligence services, we were able to prevent the al-Qaeda from establishing sanctuary and ISIS. So that was in U.S. national interest. Still, it was an acceptable stalemate as far as many policymakers were concerned. The president thought he knew better, and he was very defiant and rejected all of their advice. And then he presented a false narrative to the American people, which I find very disturbing. He said, my choice is get out now, or have to put thousands of American troops back in here to fight the Taliban and take casualties doing that. We have not been in direct combat with the Taliban since 2014. That's 8 years ago. It was 7 years when the president made that decision. That was a completely false narrative that he presented to the American people. That wasn't the choice. And the fact that all the Europeans who were in Afghanistan had 6,000 troops there, that they wanted to stay, was very telling, because they're only making that decision because it's in their national interest. It's in their interest to protect their own people. And we gave it all up. And we're back to where we were in 2001.
Now, if you talk to administration sources, national security sources, which I did yesterday, they tell you that, number one, outside investigators have proven that the attack at Abbey Gate, where we lost American blood and treasure, could not have been prevented. They also say, look, we evacuated safely about 125,000 people. A lot of those people were relocated to the United States and to our allied countries. We helped them get medical treatment. The U.S. military has never conducted an evacuation successfully on that scale before. What do you say to that?
Well, we're talking about an emergency evacuation that could have been prevented by the president's decision if he took the advice of his counselors and advisors. And certainly, it was very tragic that we lost those soldiers going out. We have left 80,000 people behind who still want to get out, who we recognize as being partners of the United States. And they're overshadowed in this thing, certainly. But listen, let's go back to this point about security at the airport. Mm-hmm. The Taliban and the United States military negotiated about security. The Taliban offered to the United States military the opportunity to have control of Kabul, and they would not be involved in the inner city of itself. We rejected that. And obviously that would have been a little bit more than we were intending to bite off in doing that. But it would have given us the opportunity to conduct a very methodical withdrawal as opposed to this chaos that we saw, and the Taliban, and keep the Taliban away from the airport completely so we could vet the people more orderly who were evacuating. That would have prevented the tragedy that we had at the end, and also the follow-up tragedy that we got involved in killing the innocent family when we thought that they were terrorists.
So Fox News learned exclusively yesterday that the DOD and State Department are nearing completion of their own after-action review a year later of what happened during the withdrawal. They're going to send that to the National Security Council in a few days, as early as this coming week. What do you think is going to be in that report?
Well, I hope it covers everything, not just the withdrawal, because the U.S. policy decisions for 20 years. Many of it on the Republican and Democratic administrations was misguided, and it got us to a point where the only thing that was acceptable to us was the stalemate. And if we go back and trace those policy decisions, I think we should be honest with ourselves of which ones were misguided and why it put us in such a difficult situation in Afghanistan after 20 years. Certainly, a focus on the withdrawal needs to be done because we lost our troops and as a result of that. And hopefully we'll get some positive answers. And more importantly, let's learn some lessons here about these decisions and in terms of going forward. And let's be honest with what took place and the mistakes that were made.
General, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, great
Really
talking to you,
appreciate it.
Jillian.
Great to talk to you.
Subscribe to the Fox News YouTube channel to catch our nightly opens, stories that are changing the world and changing your life. From Tucker Carlson tonight.